Do you know if there was any need within the developer and engineer teams on the production side to convince them that they quote unquote want to do this? That like going from working internally over to starting to participate in an open source community that can be global and quite large sometimes. It's not necessarily easy. In my personal experience, most people don't mind it, and then they like it, but there are others who are just like, this is really not for me. What was the experience within the BBC on this side?
Yeah, I think for the most part, people are proud of their work and are happy to share it with the world. And um, uh, earlier I was talking about the buzz of receiving contributions. Well, there's a buzz of your contribution being received. That kind of that extra
Yeah.
external validation that someone not even in your company wants your code. So I think for the most part, yeah, people get it. People are motivated by it rather than put off by it. But there will be some people that do feel a bit insecure. I think especially more junior people, like, oh, I'm not sure I want to contribute this code. What if it's really bad code and I get shouted at for contributing really bad code? And I think the way to deal with that risk um, is kind of mentoring people and being aware of that risk, but also psychological safety. Psychological safety is a really difficult thing to achieve in general, but I think in open source communities it's even more difficult. And you hear horror stories about certain open source projects and certain pull requests. I'm not going to name any names, but I'm sure if we did a little Google, we could find some instances of very combative and antagonistic conversations on pull requests and issues. So it's so having at least trying to foster psychological safety within your organization can it make people feel safe that if they do get shouted at, then it's kind of it's not because they've done something wrong. It's because it's almost a bad community. Maybe that's too simplistic of a word, but yeah, a non-supportive community, and it's like, yeah, it's the community's fault for not being supportive, not the engineer's fault for not knowing what they didn't know. And yeah, I guess coming back to my experience with the Inner Source Commons, I think we've always done a good job of being inclusive and fostering psychological safety, consciously or not. So mentoring people, but also preparing them for the worst and letting them know that it is a possibility, but reassuring them that it's not their fault. And we were all new to something once, and if people don't recognize that, that's their problem, not your problem.
But there's also a set of things to help them with as well, right? I mean, so, make sure that you've read all the documentation, RTFM, right? Mm-hmm. And you've lurked for a little while to understand, who these people are. And, if you know that this one particular reviewer, flames 70% of the things that are passing him, then you just know that you got a thick skin and this guy has a reasonable shot at flaming you. And it's not really that big of a deal because things continue on. Right. But, it's, knowing what the coding guidelines are, knowing, there's a lot of good prep that you can do. And if you've done those things and you screw up, then you know what? Hey, that was an honest mistake, And yeah, I had I had a guy who first Linux kernel contribution. He thought he'd done everything. He thought he'd read through everything. He made the submission, and the guy was like, well, "Why didn't you look at this? Because this clearly shows that it needed to be done this way instead of the way you've done it. What the hell are you doing?" And he literally was not able to find this piece of documentation that this reviewer was referencing. And so part of his fix was to help the reviewer out by making that piece of documentation much more easy to find for the next guy down the line, to which he was extremely appreciative. The reviewer was extremely appreciative. And yeah, they had a wonderful conversation at the next conference that they were both at, because we sent the guy to conferences. And now it's a good relationship that he actually relies on. He now has somewhat of a mentor in the kernel community because of that little interaction. But yeah, you got to approach it the right way. And yeah, in this case, again, he felt so bad when he first got flamed. But in the end, it wasn't really his fault. And again, and through dialogue, everything was done well. But anyway,
yeah, absolutely. You need experienced open source developers to mentor people so that they can be prepared for that. And reading the documentation is a skill, especially when you're reading documentation from a completely different company or community, potentially a completely different culture as well. Maybe the author might not be a native English speaker and might structure their documentation in a completely different way. All these sorts of different, just being able to adapt to differences, and not just not everything being how you're used to in your day job.